The massive viewport of Station Kepler 442 showed the endless expanse of space, where ships from dozens of worlds docked daily for the most important trade negotiations in the galaxy. But inside Conference Room 7, something was about to happen. That would change interspecies relations forever. Ambassador Jake Morrison had been sitting at that polished metal table for 6 grueling hours. 6 hours of listening to demands, threats, and what could only be described as galactic bullying. His coffee had gone cold 3 hours ago. His patience was wearing thinner than the atmosphere on Mars. The Vorthok delegate, 7-foot reptilian nightmare named Skreth, had been pushing boundaries all morning. This wasn't unusual behavior. For the Vorthok species, they were known throughout the galaxy as aggressive negotiators who believed might made right. What made this different was the audience watching every move. Around the conference table sat representatives from 12 different species. The crystalline delegate looked like a walking diamond formation, its body constantly shifting and pulsing with internal light. The Cordon representative, a bear-like creature with metallic fur, had been growling softly under his breath for the past hour. Even the peaceful Altarian observer, with its graceful tentacles and serene demeanor, seemed agitated. But they weren't watching Skreth, they were watching Jake. You see, humans had only joined the Galactic Trade Consortium 15 years ago. We were the new kids on the block, and every species wanted to test us, figure out our limits, see how far they could push before we'd break. They had no idea what they were dealing with. Skreth slammed, his clawed fist on the table for the third time, the sound echoing through the chamber like a gunshot. His yellow eyes burned with contempt as he leaned forward, venom literally dripping from his fangs onto the pristine metal surface. Your pathetic species offers nothing but weakness, he hissed, his forked tongue flicking out to taste the air. We demand triple the agreed price for our dilithium crystals, or we take your cargo by force. Now, here's where it gets interesting. Any other species would have reacted predictably. The Cordons would have roared and charged. The Zephyrians would have clicked their mandibles in anger. The Altarians would have flushed deep purple and retreated. But Jake just sat there, his jaw tightened imperceptibly. And I mean imperceptibly. We're talking about a muscle movement so slight that only the most advanced biometric sensors could detect it. But somehow, every alien in that room felt it. The crystalline observer's formations began to pulse in rapid warning patterns, shifting from calm blue to urgent amber. The Cordon representative, who had been spoiling for a fight all morning, suddenly took a step back from the table. Even the usually stoic Nexarian delegate's cybernetic implants started blinking faster. They could sense something changing in the room's atmosphere, something primal and dangerous. "I've been sitting here for 6 hours," Jake said quietly, his voice carrying a dangerous edge that made the station's air recyclers seem to pause mid-cycle. "I've listened to your demands, your threats, your posturing." The words hung in the air like a loaded weapon. Skreth, drunk on his own perceived power, completely missed the warning signs that every other species in the galaxy had learned to recognize. "And you will continue to listen until now. I'm actually getting annoyed." Jake interrupted, his words barely above a whisper. The transformation was instantaneous and terrifying. The temperature in the room seemed to drop 10 degrees, not literally. The environmental systems hadn't changed, but every alien present felt a chill run down their spines. Tentacles or whatever anatomical equivalent they possessed, every non-human delegate suddenly found urgent reasons to study their datapads. The crystalline observers' formations shifted to deep red, their species equivalent of diving for cover. The Cordon representative, who could bench press a hover car, was now pressed against the far wall. But the most telling reaction came from the Altarian observer. This was a species known for their diplomatic neutrality, their ability to remain calm in any situation. They had observed conflicts between species that could crack planets in half without so much as a tentacle twitch. Yet now, all 4 of its tentacles were wrapped protectively around its torso, and its usually serene violet coloring had drained. Too pale lavender. Skreth's confident snarl faltered as he watched Jake's perfectly controlled expression. The human hadn't moved, hadn't raised his voice, hadn't even unclenched his hands from where they rested calmly on the table, but something fundamental had shifted in the room's power dynamic. Jake's eyes, which had been merely attentive before, now held a calculating coldness that made Screeth's reptilian brain scream warnings. This wasn't anger. Anger was hot, unpredictable, manageable. This was something far more dangerous. This was a human who had moved beyond emotion into pure, tactical assessment. Within 30 seconds, the Vorthok had agreed to the original terms, not just agreed, but practically begged to sign the contract. Screeth's claws shook as he pressed his biosignature to the agreement, his yellow eyes never leaving Jake's face. The other delegates sat in stunned silence as the most aggressive negotiator in known. Space folded completely to a human who had done nothing more than speak 7 simple words. As the meeting concluded and the delegates filed out, the Altarian observer approached Jake with obvious hesitation. "Ambassador Morrison," it said softly, its voice carrying the musical quality of its species, "may I ask what would have happened if Delegate Screeth had continued his aggressive behavior?" Jake stood, straightening his simple black suit, and smiled, an expression that somehow managed to be both friendly and absolutely terrifying. "I honestly don't know," he replied, "and I'm grateful we didn't have to find out." The Altarian's tentacles shivered. It hurried from the room. What none of them realized was that they had just witnessed the birth of what would become known throughout the galaxy as the Terran Warning Protocol. That simple phrase now. "I'm actually getting annoyed" would soon be taught in military academies. "Across 1,000 worlds" is the most dangerous words in the known universe. But that's just the beginning of this story. Because what happened next would reshape the balance of power in the galaxy forever. And it all started with one human who decided he'd had enough of being pushed around. Want to see how small actions can compound into galaxy-changing results? Check out my next video about the incredible power of compounding. You'll be amazed at how tiny changes can create massive outcomes. The crimson warning lights flashed across every major military installation in the galaxy as the most urgent. Alert classification known to interspecies communications blazed across communication networks. Priority Alpha, the kind of alert reserved for supernovas, plague outbreaks, and species-ending threats. But this wasn't about a natural disaster or alien invasion. This was about 7 words that had sent shockwaves through the galactic community. Now I'm actually getting annoyed. Commander Thesis of the Cordon Military Intelligence sat in his fortified command bunker on the war moon of Krex Prime, his massive bear-like frame hunched over a holographic display showing incident reports. From across the galaxy, his metallic fur, usually a source of pride among his warrior species, now stood on end with barely contained fear. You have to understand something about the Cordons. These aren't your average spacefaring species. They're 8-foot-tall killing machines with retractable claws, reinforced bone structures, and a military culture that makes ancient Sparta look like a daycare center. Their entire society is built around the concept of honorable combat, and they've never backed down from a fight in there. 15,000-year recorded history until now. Thesis began dictating his report to the central database, its voice carrying the weight of someone who had seen the impossible and lived to tell about it. His claws clicked nervously against the metal console as he spoke. "All species are hereby warned," he began, his words being transmitted simultaneously to military commanders across 12 sectors. The human phrase, "now I'm actually getting annoyed," represents a critical behavioral threshold that our xenobiologists have been studying for the past 6 months. The data streaming across his screens told a story that defied everything the galactic community thought they knew about human psychology. Incident after incident, all following the same terrifying pattern. Unlike our warrior culture that roars before battle, the Sis continued, his voice dropping to a whisper. Humans become more controlled as their aggression escalates. This contradicts every known psychological model we have for sapient species behavior. Think about it this way. When you're really angry, what do? You raise your voice. Your heart rate spikes. Your muscles tense up. You become more emotional, more reactive. That's normal mammalian behavior, and it's consistent across hundreds of species throughout the galaxy. But humans? Humans do the opposite. Holographic display showed brain scans from human subjects during various stress levels. The readings were absolutely terrifying. As human anger increased, their emotional centers actually became more regulated, not less. It's their logical processing. Centers lit up like fusion reactors, while their fear responses practically disappeared. This verbal indicator, this is explained to his horrified audience of military commanders, marks the transition from human, diplomatic patience to what our military analysts have designated as elimination mode. The human has mentally shifted from viewing you as a negotiation partner to viewing you as a threat requiring immediate neutralization. But here's where it gets really scary. The database contained over 200 documented cases of humans uttering this phrase in the past year alone. And in every single case, every single one, the outcome was the same: complete capitulation by the opposing party within minutes. The Zephyrian Trade Guild had folded during a contract dispute. The Nixarian pirates had surrendered an entire fleet. Even the notoriously stubborn Crystalline Collective had agreed to territorial concessions after a single human diplomat spoke those 7 words. Survival Protocol Visas announced, his voice cracking slightly, immediate withdrawal and compliance. With all human demands, do not attempt to call their bluff. Do not try to escalate the situation. Do not assume they are making empty threats. Now, you might be thinking, come on, how dangerous can one angry human really be? Well, let me tell you about Captain Lisa Reynolds. Lisa's paused his official report and added a personal note, his massive frame actually trembling as he recalled the memory. I have witnessed a single human female, Captain Lisa Reynolds, end a 3-ship pirate assault using only her bare hands. After speaking these words, the screams still haunt my dreams. The incident had occurred in the Outer Rim, where Lysis had been commanding a cordon patrol fleet. Out 3 heavily armed Raktherian pirate vessels had surrounded a small human cargo ship, demanding tribute. Standard piracy scenario that played out dozens of times across the galaxy every day. Captain Reynolds had been hauling medical supplies to a colony world when the pirates made their move. She'd followed standard protocol, powering down weapons, preparing to negotiate or surrender valuable cargo to preserve her crew's lives. But then the pirates made a critical error. They boarded her ship and threatened her crew. I was trying to handle this diplomatically, Reynolds had said over the comm channel, her voice eerily calm as pirates with weapons drawn surrounded her on her own bridge. You half my cargo and let you go on your way. The lead pirate, a massive Raktharian with acidic saliva and reinforced bone spurs, had laughed at her offer. We take everything. Human, your ship, your cargo, your crew, for the slave markets. That's when Reynolds had said it. Those 7 words that had become the most feared phrase in the galaxy, now I'm actually getting annoyed, defied every law of physics and biology that the galactic community understood. Reynolds, a human female weighing maybe 140 pounds, had systematically dismantled 3 separate boarding parties, comprising over 30 heavily armed pirates. She hadn't used weapons. She hadn't called for backup. She had simply solved the problem. The first pirate through her cabin door had been a 7-foot Raktharian warrior with natural armor plating and claws that could slice through steel. Reynolds had put him down with what appeared to be a casual backhand that sent him flying across the corridor. The second boarding party had rushed her, positioned with military-grade plasma rifles. They found their weapons somehow disassembled and their leader unconscious before they could even process what was happening. The third ship had tried to flee. Reynolds had somehow disabled their engines using nothing but spare parts from her own ship's maintenance bay and what could only be described as terrifying ingenuity. The efficiency was what scared me most, Lysis admitted in his report. There was no wasted motion, no unnecessary violence. She solved the problem of the pirates with the same methodical approach you might use to fix a broken hyperdrive. Within 20 minutes, 3 pirate crews were unconscious, their ships disabled. Reynolds was back to her normal, pleasant demeanor. Asking if anyone wanted coffee, the recording of the incident had been classified at the highest levels and studied by military strategists across the galaxy. The conclusion was unanimous and terrifying. Humans in elimination mode operated on a level of tactical awareness and physical capability that bordered on supernatural. Distribution: All sectors maximum priority, Dices concluded his report, his voice heavy with the weight of what he'd witnessed. Any species encountering a human who has spoken these words should immediately cease all aggressive actions and withdraw to a safe distance. Failure to comply may result in what our analysts term permanent problem resolution. The report went out across the galaxy within hours, creating the first universal behavioral protocol in recorded interspecies history. Every diplomatic corps, every trade organization received the same message. When a human says they're actually getting annoyed, the smart move is to run. But this was just the beginning. Because what the galactic community didn't realize was that humans had been paying attention to their reactions. And we were about to turn their fear into the most powerful diplomatic tool in the universe. Want to see how small behavioral changes can compound into galaxy-shifting power dynamics? Check out my next video about the incredible power of compounding. You'll discover how tiny adjustments can create massive results over time. The cargo hauler Liberty's Edge drifted through the asteroid belt of the Vega system, its hull scarred. From years of honest trade runs through the galaxy's most dangerous shipping lanes, Captain Mike Torres had been running this route for 8 years, and today had started like any other perfect day in space. His morning coffee had been exceptional. A rare blend from the agricultural worlds of Centauri Prime that cost more than most people made in a week. The hyperspace jump had been smooth as silk, with none of the usual dimensional turbulence that made most passengers sick. Even the ship's notoriously temperamental environmental systems were humming along at peak efficiency. Torres was actually humming an old Earth song as he reviewed the day's shipping manifests when his proximity alarms started screaming. 3 Krex pirate vessels had just dropped out of hyperspace, directly ahead of his position. The Krex were notorious throughout the Outer Rim, 8 foot tall, insectoid. Nightmares with chitinous armor plating, and a complete lack of what most species would call mercy. Their ships looked like they'd been cobbled together from the wreckage of their victims, bristling with weapons that had been illegally modified far beyond galactic safety standards. "Captain," called out Zelana, his Altarian navigator, her tentacles turning the deep purple color that indicated extreme stress. 3 hostile vessels closing fast. They are targeting our engines? Torres glanced at his tactical display with the same casual interest he might show checking the weather. Huh, pirates. On a Tuesday. How original. His crew of 2 Altarians and 1 Zephyrian had been with him for 3 years, and they'd never seen him lose his cool. Not during solar storms, not during engine failures, not even during that incident with the Crystalline Collective where they'd accidentally violated 17 different territorial boundaries, but they'd also never seen him deal with pirates. The lead Krex vessel opened a communication channel, the bridge filled with the sound of clicking mandibles and guttural threats. "Human vessel, you will prepare for boarding. Resistance will result in your immediate termination." Torres actually chuckled. "Do you know what? I was having such a good day. Why do people always have to go and ruin a perfectly good day?" Docking. Clamps engaged with a metallic shriek that echoed through the ship's hull. Within minutes, the unmistakable sound of cutting torches could be heard as the pirates burned through the airlock seals. "Captain," whispered Vexai, his Zephyrian communications officer, "perhaps we should consider surrendering the cargo. It's not worth..." "Worth what?" Torres asked, his voice carrying an odd edge that made all 3 crew members look up from their hiding spots. "It's not worth what exactly?" The airlock door exploded inward in a shower of sparks and molten metal. 8 heavily armed Krex warriors stormed onto the bridge, their weapons trained on every corner of the room. The lead pirate, a massive specimen with battle scars crisscrossing his chitinous face, swept the bridge with his plasma rifle. "Surrender your cargo and crew, human scum," he roared, his weapon charging with deadly energy that made the air itself shimmer with heat. "Your ship has no weapons. You have no choice." Now here's where most cargo haulers would have immediately thrown up their hands and started negotiating. Standard piracy protocol throughout the galaxy was simple. Give them what they want. File an insurance claim, and live to trade another day. It was cost-effective, relatively safe, and kept everyone alive. But Torres wasn't most cargo haulers. He stood perfectly motionless in the center of his bridge, hands clasped behind his back, his cold blue eyes tracking the pirate's every movement. With the precision of a targeting computer, his crew, two Altarians and a Zephyrian, immediately dove for cover behind control consoles, their various appendages trembling with terror. "Was having a great day," Torres said conversationally, his voice eerily calm as 8 plasma rifles pointed at his chest. "Perfect coffee, smooth hyperspace jump, no system failures?" He smiled, but somehow that expression never reached his eyes.
Ow.
Then you showed up. The lead pirate stepped forward, pressing his weapon directly against Torres' forehead. The energy discharge was so close that it singed the captain's hair, filling the air with the smell of burning protein. "Final warning, human?" The pirate snarled, his mandibles clicking with barely contained violence. And that's when Torres said it. "Now I'm actually getting annoyed," he whispered. The transformation was immediate and absolute. The alien crew members behind him didn't just whimper, they practically sobbed in terror. Zelana's tentacles wrapped around her torso in a protective posture, at her species only used when facing extinction-level threats. Vexai's compound eyes dilated to maximum size, a fear response that indicated he was preparing to witness something that would traumatize him for life. The pirates, unfamiliar with human behavioral patterns, hesitated in confusion at the crew's reaction. Here they were, 8 heavily armed warriors holding a single unarmed human at gunpoint. And somehow, his own crew was acting like they were the ones in danger. That 2-second hesitation was all Torres needed. What happened next defied every law of physics, biology, and common sense that the galactic community understood. Torres moved with a fluid precision that seemed to bend the very concept of space and time. The lead pirate's weapon was in his hands before the alien even realized he'd lost it. The second pirate tried to bring his rifle to bear, but Torres was already behind him, the weapon spinning through the air to clatter uselessly against the bulkhead. The third and fourth pirates opened fire, and their plasma bolts searing through the space where Torres had been standing a nanosecond before. But Torres wasn't there anymore. He was systematically dismantling their assault with the casual efficiency of someone troubleshooting a minor technical problem. No wasted motion, no unnecessary violence, just pure problem solving, applied to what he now considered an obstacle requiring removal. The fifth pirate managed to get off a single shot before finding himself unconscious on the deck, his weapon somehow disassembled into its component parts. The sixth and seventh pirates tried to coordinate their attack, but Torres had already calculated their movement patterns and was 3 steps ahead of their tactical planning. 7 minutes later, 7 minutes. All 8 pirates were unconscious, their weapons scattered across the deck like children's toys. Torres stood over them, not even breathing hard, straightening his uniform with the same care he'd shown that morning while reviewing shipping manifests. His crew stared in, absolute shock from their hiding places, their various species anatomical equivalents of jaws hanging open in disbelief. Captain Zelana whispered, her voice shaking, "How did you?" Torres looked genuinely puzzled by the question. "How did I what?" "They were disrupting my schedule." "I solved the problem." He glanced at his chronometer. "We're still on time for the Proxima delivery if we leave in the next 10 minutes. The unconscious pirates would wake up in the ship's cargo bay, securely restrained and with a formal complaint filed against them with the Galactic Trade Authority. Their weapons would be confiscated, their ships impounded, and their piracy careers effectively ended. But the real impact of what had happened wouldn't be felt for weeks, because Vexai, the Zephyrian communications officer, had recorded the entire encounter. That recording would make its way through underground networks, military intelligence channels, and diplomatic corps throughout the galaxy. Within a month, every pirate organization in known space would have received the same message: avoid human cargo haulers at all costs. The phrase "now I'm actually getting annoyed" had become the most feared combination of words in the criminal underworld. But Torres, he just went back to his captain's chair, poured himself another cup of that expensive coffee, and continued, humming that old Earth song as if nothing had happened. The power of controlled response had just shifted the balance of power in the galaxy's shipping lanes forever. And it all started with one human who refused to let anyone ruin his perfect day. Want to see how small moments of decisive action can compound into life-changing results? Check out my next video about the incredible power of compounding, you'll discover how tiny choices can create massive transformations over time. The Interspecies Combat Academy on Titan Station, housed the most elite military training facility in known space. Are the galaxy's finest warriors learn to face threats that could end civilizations. But today, in Training Bay 7, 24 of the most promising cadets from across 12 different species were about to face something that terrified them more than black holes. Supernovas or plague ships. They were about to face an annoyed human. General Patricia Wade stood at the center of the massive simulation chamber, her steel-gray hair pulled back in a regulation military bun, her uniform bearing the scars of campaigns fought across 3 different star systems. At 58, she was one of the most decorated officers in Terran military history, having survived encounters with everything from hive mind collectives to reality-warping entities. But the look in her eyes as she surveyed the trembling cadets suggested that what they were about to experience would be far worse than anything she'd faced in actual combat. Listen up, recruits. Wade's voice echoed through the chamber with the authority of someone who had commanded fleets and toppled governments. Today you face the most dangerous opponent in the galaxy, an annoyed human. The mixed species cadets stood at attention, their various appendages trembling slightly despite their advanced military training. There was Crix, a Cordon warrior whose species had conquered 17 star systems through pure aggression. Next to him stood Zephes, a crystalline formation, whose people could manipulate matter at the molecular level. Behind them, Vorthok, Nixarian, and Altarian cadets tried to maintain composure, despite the primal fear radiating from every fiber of their beings. These weren't ordinary soldiers. Each one represented the absolute pinnacle of their species. Military capabilities. It survived training regimens that would kill most sapient beings, mastered weapon systems that could level cities, and demonstrated tactical prowess that had earned them positions in the galaxy's most elite military academy. And they were all terrified. The holographic training environment materialized around them with crystal clarity. They found themselves in a perfect recreation of the Galactic Trade Consortium's main negotiation chamber, complete with the polished metal table, ambient lighting, and the subtle hum of life support systems that maintained atmosphere for 12 different species. Your mission, Wade continued, pacing around the cadets like a predator circling prey, is to negotiate with Ambassador Robert Chen without triggering the Terran warning protocol. Failure means you experience what our enemies call the human problem-solving mode. A young Cordon cadet named Grex raised his massive claw, his metallic fur bristling with what his species considered courage, but what everyone else recognized as barely contained panic. Instructor, surely we can overpower a single human? My species has conquered worlds through superior strength and tactics. Wade's smile was predatory, carrying the kind of cold amusement that made seasoned veterans take involuntary steps backward. Cadet. There are exactly 4 documented cases in galactic history of successful combat against a human after they've uttered the warning phrase. In all 4 cases, the attackers had numerical superiority of at least 50-1. Suffered 90% casualties. The silence that followed was deafening. You could hear the environmental systems cycling air, the subtle hum of the holographic projectors, the rapid breathing of 24 of the galaxy's most elite warriors trying to process what they'd just heard. Let me put this in perspective. For you, Wade continued, her voice dropping to a conversational tone that somehow made her words more terrifying. The first case involved a single human diplomat facing 63 armed Rakthorian pirates. The human was unarmed, outnumbered, and had been negotiating for 7 hours straight. When they finally said those 7 words, the incident was over in 4 minutes. 57 pirates dead, 6 survivors requiring immediate medical attention, and the human didn't have so much as a bruise. The crystalline cadets' formation shifted to deep red, their species equivalent of turning pale. Instructor, how is that possible? The mathematics of combat don't support mathematics. Wade laughed, a sound that made the chamber's temperature seem to drop several degrees. Cadet, humans don't follow your mathematics when they enter elimination mode. They rewrite the rules of engagement entirely. The hologram activated with a soft chime. Ambassador Robert Chen appeared in the center of the chamber, looking exactly like what he was, a mild-mannered diplomat in his early 50s.
Ow.
Wearing a simple gray suit and carrying a leather briefcase filled with trade agreements. His brown eyes held the patient expression of someone who had spent decades negotiating with difficult personalities. But the cadets recoiled as if they'd just been presented with a live fusion bomb. "Remember," Wade called out, "humans don't just win fights, they end them. Permanently." The simulation began with Chen taking his seat at the negotiation table, his movements casual and unthreatening. He even smiled pleasantly as he opened his briefcase and began arranging documents. "Good morning," Chen said in a voice that carried no hint of aggression or malice. "I understand we have some trade disputes to resolve today." The cadets approached the table with the same caution they might use when diffusing antimatter explosives. Grex the Cordon took the lead position as the designated negotiator, his massive frame dwarfing the human diplomat across from him. "Human," Grex began, his voice carrying the traditional Cordon tone of barely restrained violence. "Your species offers inferior goods at inflated prices. We demand better terms." Chen's smile never wavered. "I'm sure we can work something out. What specifically are your concerns?" For the next 30 minutes, the cadets watched in fascination as Chen demonstrated the legendary human trait of diplomatic patience. He listened to unreasonable demands, absorbed personal insults, and maintained perfect composure as the alien cadets tested every boundary they could imagine. But Wade was monitoring Chen's biometric readings on her private display. Heart rate steady. Stress hormones minimal. Facial microexpressions showing no signs of agitation. Then Grex made a critical error. "Your species is weak," he snarled, slamming his claw on the table. "We could take what we want by force if we choose." Chen's smile faltered for just a moment. His jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. The temperature in the room seemed to shift, though the environmental controls hadn't changed. "I've been sitting here for 30 minutes, Chen said quietly, his voice carrying an edge that made the holographic projectors seem to stutter. "I've listened to your demands, your threats, your attempts to intimidate me." Every cadet in the chamber instinctively stepped back from the table. Their training had taught them to recognize predatory behavior, and something fundamental had just changed in the human's demeanor. "Now, I'm actually getting annoyed," Chen whispered. The transformation was instantaneous and absolute. The mild-mannered diplomat vanished, replaced by something that made the cadets' survival instincts scream. Warnings. Chen's eyes went cold and calculating. His posture shifted to something that suggested coiled violence. And his smile became something that would haunt their dreams for years to come. The simulation ended immediately as every single cadet, simultaneously, activated their emergency extraction protocols, choosing to fail the exercise rather than face what came next. Wade nodded approvingly as the hologram faded. "Excellent survival instincts, recruits. You've just learned the most important lesson in modern military strategy. When a human says those words, the intelligent response is immediate retreat." The cadets stood in stunned silence, their various species' anatomical equivalents of cold, sweats clearly visible. "The galaxy has spent the last 3 years documenting human behavioral patterns," Wade continued. "Every major military academy now includes mandatory courses on Terran warning recognition. Pirates avoid human ships. Hostile species negotiate rather than fight. Even the Hive Mind Collective has issued directives to avoid provoking human anger." Paused, letting the implications sink in. "You've just witnessed the most powerful weapon in the galaxy, not a plasma cannon or antimatter bomb, but a simple phrase that can end conflicts before they begin." The power of controlled response had just become the foundation of galactic peacekeeping strategy. And it all started with understanding that sometimes the most dangerous weapon is the one that never needs to be used. Want to see how small psychological advantages can compound into overwhelming strategic superiority? Check out my next video about the incredible power of compounding. You'll discover how tiny behavioral changes can create massive competitive advantages over time. The command bridge of the Terran dreadnought Retribution floated in the darkness of space like a monument to humanity's unexpected rise to galactic prominence. Through the massive viewport, stars stretched endlessly in every direction, each one representing solar systems where billions of alien beings had learned to fear 7 simple words, spoken by a species that had joined the galactic community less than 2 decades ago. Admiral Susan Blake stood at the center of the secure briefing room, her weathered hands clasped behind her back as she surveyed the holographic star map that dominated the chamber. The display showed humanity's official territory, a relatively small sector of space containing maybe 30 star systems. But the real map, the one that mattered, showed something entirely different. The zones highlighted in blue represented areas where human diplomatic influence extended far beyond any official borders. These weren't territories conquered through military might or economic pressure. They were regions where entire species had simply decided it was easier to cooperate with humanity than to risk finding out what happened when humans stopped being diplomatic. The psychological conditioning is complete, reported Dr. James Patterson, the collective's chief warfare psychologist, his voice carrying the satisfaction of someone who had just witnessed the successful completion of the most ambitious behavioral modification project in galactic history. Patterson was a thin man in his 50s, who looked more like a university professor than a military strategist. But his unassuming appearance masked one of the most brilliant tactical minds in human space. He had spent the last 3 years studying alien psychology, mapping their behavioral patterns, and designing what would become known as the most effective peacekeeping strategy ever deployed. Every major species now recognizes the warning phrase and responds with immediate compliance, he continued, gesturing to data streams that showed incident reports from across the galaxy. The conditioning has exceeded our most optimistic projections. Admiral Blake turned from the star map, her gray eyes reflecting the weight of command decisions that had shaped the fate of entire civilizations. Casualty reports? Minimal, Patterson replied, his tone carrying a note of amazement even he couldn't quite suppress. The Vorthok incident at Kepler 442 was resolved without a single shot fired. Ambassador Morrison's negotiation ended with complete capitulation from a species known for never backing down from a confrontation. The room fell silent as the implications sank in. The Vorthok were legendary throughout the galaxy for their aggressive nature and complete refusal to compromise. Their entire culture was built around the concept of strength through conflict. The fact that they had folded completely to a single human diplomat was sending shockwaves through military strategists across known space. The Krex pirates surrendered their entire fleet after Captain Torres's demonstration. Patterson continued, scrolling through incident reports that read like something from a science fiction novel. Over 300 vessels, representing the largest pirate organization in the Outer Rim, simply laid down their weapons and requested safe passage to the nearest penal colonies. Colonel Nancy Williams, the collective's senior strategic analyst, leaned forward in her chair, her eyes bright with the excitement of someone who had just witnessed history being made. The beautiful part is the self-reinforcing nature of the conditioning. Every time they back down, they strengthen their own fear response. We've created a galaxy-wide phobia of human aggression. But here's where it gets really interesting. Humans hadn't actually done anything particularly aggressive. They hadn't launched military campaigns, hadn't conquered worlds, hadn't even threatened anyone directly. They had simply existed. And somehow, that existence had become the most powerful deterrent in galactic history. Status report on the phrase's effectiveness? Admiral Blake asked, though she already knew the answer from the daily briefings that crossed her desk. 100% success rate across all documented encounters, Dr. Patterson replied, his voice carrying the weight of statistical certainty. The mere words "now I'm actually getting annoyed" trigger immediate retreat responses in every known species. We've turned human emotional regulation into the most powerful weapon in galactic history. Think about that for a moment. In a galaxy filled with species that could manipulate matter at the molecular level, others that could phase through solid objects, and civilizations that had mastered faster than light travel thousands of years before humans discovered fire. The most feared weapon wasn't technology at all. It was emotional control. And the best part? Colonel Williams added, with a grin that would have made a Cheshire cat proud. They're teaching their own children to fear us. Military academies across the galaxy now include mandatory courses on Terran warning recognition. They're doing our psychological warfare for us. The holographic display shifted to show educational curricula from dozens of different species. Course titles like Recognizing Human Behavioral Patterns, De-escalation Techniques for Terran Encounters, and Emergency Protocols for Diplomatic Incidents were now standard requirements for anyone entering interspecies relations. But the crown jewel of the display was a children's educational program from the Altarian school system. The lesson was titled, Why We Must Always Be Polite to Humans, and it featured cartoon representations of various species. Learning to recognize the warning signs of human annoyance, they're literally programming their next generation to be afraid of us, Williams observed, her voice carrying a note of awe. Without firing a single shot or conquering a single world, we've become the most respected species in the galaxy. Admiral Blake nodded approvingly, but her expression remained thoughtful. The Corden Empire has issued formal apologies for 3 separate diplomatic incidents, including one where their ambassador actually prostrated himself before our trade representative, the Corden Empire. Let that sink in for a moment. These were the same 8-foot-tall warrior bears who had conquered 17 star systems through pure military might. Their entire culture was built around the concept of honorable combat, and they had never apologized to anyone for anything in their 15,000-year recorded history, until they met humans. The galaxy has learned that peace is preferable to finding out what happens when humans stop being polite, Blake concluded, her words carrying the weight of absolute certainty. But here's the most beautiful part of the entire strategy. Humanity hadn't actually changed at all. They were still the same species that had spent most of their history fighting each other over resources, territory, and ideology. The only difference was that now they were fighting for something bigger, a place in the galactic community that commanded respect without requiring conquest. The strategic brilliance was breathtaking in its simplicity. Instead of trying to compete with species that had technological advantages spanning millennia, humans had leveraged their greatest strength: the ability to remain calm under pressure while calculating the most efficient solution to any problem. Dr. Patterson pulled up the final slide in his presentation, showing incident reports from across the galaxy. Mission accomplished. Throughout the galaxy, alien species continue their daily lives, but always with one rule burned into their collective consciousness. When a human says they're getting annoyed, it's time to run. The room fell silent as the implications of what they had achieved truly sank in. Without massive military expenditures, without conquering worlds, without even raising their voices, humanity had become the most influential species in known space. And it all started with understanding that sometimes the most powerful weapon is the one that never needs to be fired. Admiral Blake stood, gazing out at the stars where thousands of species lived in respectful terror of humanity's controlled fury. The galaxy had learned that peace wasn't just preferable to war, it was preferable to finding out what humans were really capable of when they stopped being diplomatic. The age of human dominance hadn't begun with conquest. It had begun with a simple phrase that reminded everyone that sometimes the most dangerous opponent is the one who stays calm while everyone else is losing their minds. Want to see how small strategic advantages can compound into overwhelming, long-term success? Check out my next video about the incredible power of compounding. You'll discover how tiny behavioral changes can create massive competitive advantages that reshape entire industries. The end.